Have you ever walked away from a conversation feeling defeated, despite saying everything you thought needed to be said? Ever felt that weight in your chest, like every word exchanged had somehow drained your strength? Maybe you're surrounded by voices that speak over you, laugh at your restraint, dominate the space with arrogance dressed as confidence. And maybe, just maybe, you've come to believe that silence is weakness, that not responding is surrender, that if you don't fight back, you've lost. But what if I told you that this belief is a lie, that true power has never lived in noise, but in stillness? Nietzsche, one of the most misunderstood minds in all of philosophy, saw what few dare to see, that those who talk too much reveal far more than they realize, that the need to argue is already a sign of insecurity. Society tells us to fight, to explain, to justify, as though every exchange were a battlefield of ideas. But nature, Nietzsche believed, whispers something else entirely, a subtler, sharper, more intelligent path. He saw silence not as the absence of speech, but as the overwhelming presence of power. Silence unsettles. It disarms. It turns the mirror on the other. This message is for those of you who feel constantly ignored, for those who leave conversations wondering why they still feel unseen, for the ones who try to keep the peace while others trample all over your calm. You've mistaken your silence for submission, but I'm here to show you it might be your greatest weapon, because the true victory isn't in winning arguments. It's in transcending the need to argue at all. Let's reframe silence, not as inaction, but as the final move. Let's go deeper. Why are we so addicted to reacting? Why does the impulse to correct, defend, or explain feel so urgent? Because we've been conditioned to believe that silence is defeat, that if we don't respond, we're letting the other side win. But Nietzsche would call this a deep hidden insecurity, a weakness in disguise. At its root lies the ego, fragile, obsessed with approval, desperate not to appear foolish or wrong. He believed that most people don't argue to seek truth. They argue to dominate, to cling to their worldview, because the alternative threatens to collapse their identity. And once you fall into that trap, once you feel the need to justify, you've already lost. Why? Because you're still playing their game, still seeking permission to believe what you already know. Nietzsche called this herd morality, living according to others' approval, bound by the fear of rejection. And that fear is the leash that keeps you small. He urged us to understand, true strength isn't in persuasion, it's in resilience. It's in holding firm while others mock, criticize, misunderstand. It's in the ability to remain still when everything in you wants to lash out. Power isn't measured in comebacks, it's measured in composure. If you want real dominance, you must know this. The moment you react, you hand over control. And Nietzsche knew, the reactive mind is a mind in chains. The mind that observes, that's the mind that commands. So how do we show strength without reacting? If words expose us, how do we make our presence felt? How do we make people respect us without saying a word? Nietzsche gave us the answer in his vision of the Übermensch, the overman. Not a brute force, but a sovereign soul, a being who rises above conventional morality, who commands not through volume, but through silence. The Übermensch doesn't argue, doesn't need validation. He watches, he calculates, and when he does speak, every word lands like thunder. His silence is not a void. It's a message. It's dominance without display. His silence feels like a presence. It's heavy. It's unsettling. While others yell and explain, he merely observes and exposes weakness with nothing but calm. His silence is a fortress. Others try to climb it, to break it, to interpret it, and in doing so, they reveal their own insecurity. This is not passivity. This is strategy, emotional economy. Every word you speak is a card revealed. Every reaction a weakness shown. The Übermensch stays silent because he doesn't need to prove anything. His very stillness speaks, and more importantly, it disturbs, because silence forces others to hear themselves, and many can't stand what echoes back. In a world of noise, the one who masters silence holds the throne. Nietzsche's Übermensch creates his own rules, his own values. He is not governed by praise or guilt or fear. That's why he's dangerous. That's why he's free. And when he does speak, the world listens, because his silence wasn't absence, it was preparation. But let's ask the deeper question. Why is silence so disturbing to others? Why does your calm presence unsettle them more than any argument? The answer lies not in philosophy but in psychology. And this is what we'll explore next. Because to master silence, you need to understand the chaos it triggers in others. And that chaos, it's far more revealing than you think. Silence isn't just the absence of sound, it's a mirror. And what people see in that mirror, when no one's arguing, defending, or explaining, is often unbearable. When you choose not to react, you don't just quiet your voice, you turn up theirs. You force them to hear themselves, to confront their own contradictions. Without your resistance, they're alone with their thoughts, and that silence, that's the loudest thing they'll ever hear. Most people speak not to express, but to hide, to escape the discomfort of their inner void, to maintain the illusion that they are in control. But your silence removes their mask, and in that moment, the game is already over. Social psychology has already proven what Nietzsche intuited long before it was backed by science. In moments of confrontation, silence is rarely interpreted as neutrality. It is felt as judgment. Even if you're simply listening, even if your intention is peace, the speaker begins to unravel. Why? Because without your reaction, they lose control of the script they're trying to direct. The human brain doesn't cope well with ambiguity. It panics. The amygdala, the center of fear, anxiety, and social threat detection, activates. The other person starts projecting. Is he judging me? Did he catch my insecurity? Does he see right through me? In that psychological fog, your silence becomes a blade, unseen but cutting deep. And Nietzsche understood this long before we gave it names. To him, most people live as slaves to reaction. They speak not to express, but to defend. They act out of fear, out of vanity, out of the dread of being forgotten. But the higher self, the one who has achieved mastery, remains silent, not out of helplessness, but because they understand that every word spoken is a position exposed. Every reaction is a flare showing the enemy exactly where to strike. Silence dismantles manipulators. It ruins their strategies. These are people who thrive on emotional control, who feed off your reactions like parasites. When you withhold that reaction, you break their loop. They panic, they spin, because without your response, their identity begins to crack. What they hide gets revealed, and what they reveal is weakness. But the effect of silence goes deeper than strategy. It hits something primal. Silence touches the raw nerve of unresolved wounds, rejection, abandonment, humiliation. Suddenly, the one speaking realizes something terrifying. They are not the center. Their voice doesn't echo like they thought it would. Their presence doesn't impact like they assumed. And to the narcissistic ego, this is unbearable. So when you choose to stay quiet, you are not retreating. You are attacking, right at the core of their illusion. But that's why silence demands strength, not just because it unsettles others, but because it goes against your own conditioning. It contradicts the urge to defend, to explain, to be seen as right. Yet it is precisely because it is so difficult that it holds power. Power that is no longer about dominating others, but mastering yourself. Now that you understand how silence disorients, reveals, and destabilizes others, what comes next is transformation. You're no longer here to observe silence as a concept. You're here to learn to wield it, strategically, intentionally. Because silence is not just a defense, it's a weapon. And if you learn how to use it, no one, not manipulators, not critics, not even your own doubts, will ever hold power over you again. The time has come to act. Knowledge without application is just dead philosophy. From now on, your silence will not be passive. It will be sharp, deliberate, devastating. And it all begins with the first rule: be silent when every part of you wants to respond. That moment, when your pride flares, when your ego burns to speak, that's the battlefield. That's where strength is measured. And resisting that impulse, that is power. Because every time you explain, you reveal that you still care, that you still seek approval, that you're still playing someone else's game. True silence is born only when the need to prove something dies. It is the silence of one who knows truth does not need an audience to exist. The second principle of silence is this: observe. While others talk, justify, and stumble over their words, you watch. But not like someone waiting for a turn. You watch like a hunter tracks movement in a forest. You study tones, expressions, contradictions. You listen for fear disguised as confidence, for the cracks beneath the performance. And when you speak, if you speak, it is surgical, precise. You don't speak to contribute, you speak to finish. The third weapon, time. Let the silence linger, let the pause become pressure, let the space between their words stretch until they fill it with assumptions, panic, and projections. People can't stand silence, so let them feel it. Let them sink into it. One look from you, held long enough, can have the impact of an entire argument. The fourth rule, be unpredictable. When you master silence, you become unreadable. And what is unreadable is feared. If they can't anticipate your next move, they lose control. The conversation now orbits around you, not because you dominate, but because they're reacting to your non-reaction. You become the gravitational force, not reactive, but central. At this level, silence is not absence, it is presence. It is the highest form of dominance. But beware, do not confuse this silence with weakness. Nietzsche never preached submission. This is not silence as surrender. This is silence with teeth. Tense, intentional, alive with meaning. You're not retreating, you're positioning, you're calculating, you're waiting. And when you finally speak, just one sentence, it won't need to be loud, it will be final. But what if this isn't just about winning arguments? What if you're not in a battle of ideas, but a war for your sanity? Because there's another kind of silence, one that doesn't come from strength, but from exhaustion. From years of swallowing your truth, hiding your anger, and calling it maturity. A silence that isn't wise, but broken. That's where things turn dark. Because when silence becomes survival, you're no longer using it, you're being used by it. It's a terrifying truth. Some people build entire empires on your silence. And while you think you're keeping peace, they are taking everything. And Nietzsche knew this. There is nothing more perverse than being silenced, except being taught that your silence is virtuous. That to never confront, to never defend, to always yield is maturity. But that is not peace. That is submission dressed up in manners. You've likely seen it. The ones who push their agenda while you stay calm. Who interrupt while you listen. Who occupy your space while you avoid confrontation. And you convince yourself, it's fine. It's not worth it. I'd rather stay out of it. But the truth is brutal. You're paying for that peace with your power. And they know it. Nietzsche spoke of the morality of slaves, a value system designed by the weak, not to gain freedom but to survive. A code that teaches you to be small, to shrink yourself, to smile while doing it, and call it virtue. But Nietzsche did not write for those who comply. He wrote for those who resist, for those who one day open their eyes and say, enough. Because when you accept the silence of surrender, you disappear. You become a tool in someone else's story. You are no longer you. You are what others find convenient. This is the opposite of the will to power. True power isn't in yelling nor in control. It's in reclaiming your life. It's in choosing silence not because you fear conflict, but because you owe no explanation, not to anyone, ever. The silence of surrender must die, and in its place the silence of presence must rise. A silence that does not apologize for existing. A silence that walks into a room and shifts the energy. A silence that anchors itself so deeply that even chaos bends around it. This is the silence Nietzsche would respect, the silence of one who has mastered themselves. But how do you get there? How do you stop being used and start using your presence to command respect? The answer lies in Nietzsche's most powerful figure, the Übermensch. We've talked about him before. Now it's time to become him, because the world doesn't need more noise. It needs those who wield silence like a crown. We've come to the final truth, and you need to hear this with total clarity. Silence is not emptiness. It is not the absence of thought. It is presence made visible. It is the final form of self-control. true silence is a declaration. It says, I am no longer reacting to the world, I am shaping it. Nietzsche didn't write for those who are content to cope. He wrote for those who are ready to transcend, for those who will tear off every social mask, no matter how painful, and face themselves fully. Because the silence of the Übermensch is not the silence of the timid, it is the silence of the warrior who has already won, before the battle even begins. It is the stillness of someone who no longer needs approval, because they know what they are, and more importantly, they know what they deserve. So now, look inward. How many times have you stayed silent, not out of strength, but out of fear? How often have you given others the right to narrate your life while you stood aside? Enough, Nietzsche would say. To live like this is an insult to life itself. From this day forward, your silence must change. It must stop being an escape and become a declaration, a boundary, a signature, even if no one understands you. Because who you are does not need to be understood. It needs to be lived. And that takes courage. Do you have it? Then comment below, I choose the silence that commands respect. Not just so I know you made it here, but so you claim that choice publicly. Let your words echo, because even silence needs a voice, and don't stop now. The next video is not a suggestion, it's a continuation. If this one changed how you think, the next one will change how you live. And always remember, the weak shout, the strong remain silent, the wise choose when